الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Inshallah, this is the first lesson. We'll start with Aqidah. We had the fiqh lesson for about a month, and you'd asked for something on Aqidah, so inshallah this will be a little bit different than the fiqh. The fiqh is very long, we're not really rushing to get through anything, and it's one book, and we'll stick with that book the way it's going. I think it's going well. For this one, just because I think for this topic it will be better to pick different rasa'il and different small books and mutun, to go through one here and pick topics about different issues and start our way up. So we'll start from the bottom, and it'll be very quick, and then we'll work our way up, and the more detailed we get, the longer we'll spend on the topics. But I think this will work better for the Aqidah lessons. And when we're studying Aqidah, there's many topics that we would have to go through. There's obviously the first basic issues of Tawheed and Shirk, and what is considered Tawheed and what is considered Shirk, and what actually makes someone enter Islam, or what are the conditions for someone to be Muslim, as well as how does someone leave Islam, because we need to know that as well. Just as important to know, to first of all to stay away from it ourselves, and to also know who is considered actually Muslim and who isn't considered Muslim, because this is also something that is from the ahkam of our religion. So this is something that we also go into as well. And included in that is in the issues of Aqidah is talking about the pillars of Imân, which is belief in Allah, which would be related to the Shirk and the Tawheed, but also talking about what we believe about the Malaika and the Anbiya and the Rusul, and the books of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He revealed, and everything that's included in that. So what are the rights of the prophets, and what do we believe about what their abilities are, and what the rulings are related to them, and likewise with the Malaika, what are their powers, and what are their sifat, and what don't we give them, because many people might go too extreme with the Malaika and too extreme with the Rusul. So likewise those issues go into Aqidah. And then also talking about the Akhirah, and what do we believe about the Adhab and the Na'im and the Qabr, also the Day of Judgment, and Al-Jannah wal Nar, and the sifat of these things, and what are the rulings of people reject certain aspects of these aspects of the Deen. All of these things come under the topics of Aqidah. And likewise some issues related to tabarruk, or seeking blessings from people or objects and these types of things, and seeking protection from these things. All of these aspects are from Aqidah, and inshallah eventually we'll work our way through all of these topics bi'idhnillah, if we're given tawfiq to do these things. But so we need to start somewhere. So the first thing that we'll start is with the most important issue, which is the Tawheed and Shirk. And even that we'll start with the most basic things of generally what is Tawheed and what is Shirk, and what are the rights of Tawheed and what are the rights of when it comes to dealing with Shirk. So because of this, the risala that I printed in Arabic and English, it's called Dîn of Islâm وقاعدته. And it's, as you can see, even with the translation, it's only one page. But inshallah, it's very beneficial, and it'll give us the basis of everything that we'll talk about after this, with regards to the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the rights, or the huquq of La ilaha illallah, and what this means. So inshallah we'll start with this, and then I don't know how long it'll take, but we'll go through it, and we'll if there's any questions, we'll leave them till the end, and we'll leave the questions specifically to the stuff about this lesson. So does someone want to read it? Jamal, you want to read it? In Arabic, and then I can read it in English.
أصل دين الإسلام وقاعدته للإمام محمد بن عبد-Wahhab رحمه الله. أصل دين وقاعدته الإسلام أمران. الأول الأمر بعبادة الله وحده لا شريك له والتحريض على ذلك والموالاة فيه وتكفير من تركه. الثاني الإنذار عن الشرك في عبادة الله والتغليظ في ذلك والمعادة فيه وتكفير من فعله. فلا يتم مقام التوحيد إلا بهذا وهو دين الرسل أنذروا قومهم من الشرك كما قال تعالى ولقد بعثنا في كل أمة رسولا أن اعبدوا الله واجتنبوا الطاغوت. سورة النحل آية 36 الدروس السنية في الأجوبة النجدية.
Okay, so here we see that this risala is based upon what's the asl of the Dîn of Islam, and we know that the asl is something that it's the basis or it's the root, so it's the thing that everything else is built upon. So that's linguistically what the asl means, and I mean it's not too important to go into all the details of that. So here when the Imam talks about this, he's saying the asl Dîn al-Islam, so the basis of the religion of Islam. So everything in Islam comes from these points or branches out from these points, and everything else is based upon it, or it's having everything else without these things essentially in the end is useless. So if someone says they believe in Allah and they pray 5 times a day, but then they don't have these matters that inshallah we're going to talk about, then we can't consider them to be Muslimin, because if someone has the branch of something but he doesn't have the basis, then everything else that comes after it is considered invalid or void, and it's pointless to really have, because if you do something good but then you cancel it out with something that invalidates it, then it's considered void and it's not acceptable to begin with. So this is the reason, like I said, why we're starting with this point, because everything in our deen is contingent, or it's dependent upon understanding these points. Inshallah, that'll become clear. So the first thing is, he says the foundation. So we talked about what the foundation or the asl is, or what is meant by that. So the next thing is Islam. What is Islam? Islam is our religion. It's the religion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that Ibrahim surrendered to him, إِذْ قَالَ لَهُ رَبُّهُ أَسْلِمْ قَالَ أَسْلَمْتُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Or when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about Ibrahim that he said, his Lord said to him, surrender, and he said, I've surrendered to the Lord of the world. So this is where the phrase Islam comes from, is from surrendering. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about Ibrahim, huwa sammakum al-muslimina min qabl, or he's the one who called you the Muslimin from before. So the phrase Islam, or in the phrase Muslimin, comes from when Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam called the ones who follow the true religion to be Muslimin, and when it's the surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And some of the scholars have defined Islam as being al-istislamu lillahi bit-tawheed wal-inqiyadu lahu bit-ta'a wal-bara'atu min ash-shirki wa ahlihi, or surrendering to Allah with tawheed, and surrendering to Allah with tawheed, and surrendering to Him, or following or obeying Him with complete obedience, and being disavowed or having no ties with shirk and its people. So this is how the scholars have defined Islam. So we see from this that Islam has things that relate to the person himself and relate to how he deals with other people. So it's not sufficient for someone to say, I'm Muslim, and then it's the end. It's Islam, and inshallah we'll talk about this in a lot more detail when we come to the issues of Iman, or Musamma al-Iman, or the reality of Iman and Kufr. But Islam is something that's it's outward and it's inward. So someone having belief in their heart isn't sufficient, just like someone outwardly acting upon Islam isn't sufficient. We need both things, because if someone has it on the inside and not on the outside, then he hasn't actually followed the religion. He just believes it in his heart. And we know that this was the case with many of the kuffar, and even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we know that his uncle Abu Talib believed in Islam, that it's the true religion, and he knew he was a prophet, and he even protected him. And we don't say that he protected him necessarily because he was a prophet, but he did protect him, and he did know that this was the true religion. But despite that, we know that the Prophet ﷺ made shafa'ah for him, and despite the Prophet ﷺ's shafa'ah for him, he's still in Jahannam, and the Prophet ﷺ described his punishment is that he's given two shoes or 2 slippers that caused his brain to boil. So we know, and this is despite all the good, or the good that came from his actions in protecting the Prophet ﷺ during the early days of the da'wah. So he had belief in his heart that Islam was the true religion, and that the Prophet ﷺ deserved to be protected, regardless of the reason why he protected him. But he did have this belief, but we know it didn't help him. And likewise, we know if someone acts upon it outwardly, if they pray and give zakat and fast and make hajj and perform jihad and give sadaqah and all these other things, but they don't believe it in their heart, then we know that they're munafiqeen. And that we know that they're not only they're in the fire, but they're in the lowest level of the fire. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِي الدَّرْكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ وَلَن تَجِدَ لَهُمْ نَصِيرًا. Or verily the munafiqeen are in the lowest level of the fire, and you will never find any supporter for them. So we see from these 2 examples, and also the example of Fir'aun and his people, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُمْ ظُلْمًا وَعُلُوًّا. Or they rejected it outwardly, but inside they were certain of it, but then they did this out of oppression or uluwa, or pride. So we hear that Fir'aun, and he's from the Imams of Kufr, inside he knew Musa and Harun, what they came with was the truth, but we know it didn't benefit him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَجَحَدُوا بِهَا وَاسْتَيْقَنَتْهَا أَنفُسُهُم. So not only did they believe it, they were sure of it. They were certain 100% that what Musa and Harun came with was correct, and it was from Allah. But we know that it didn't help them. So this is why we see that Islam isn't sufficient for only on one of these 2 things. And likewise, like we'll come to see, Tawheed and Shirk is something, or Tawheed and Kufr is something that's related to the person himself and what he says and does, and it also relates to how he deals with other people. So we'll see, inshallah, that the Muslimin, or someone being Muslim, gives them rights upon the other Muslimin, and someone being a disbeliever or a kafir has certain implications on how we deal with them and the rights that we give them as opposed to the Muslim. So we'll see that all of these matters all come back to the issue of Tawheed and Shirk. So we see here that this is the definition of Islam. So, and we see that how they defined it, that it was related to staying away from Shirk and its people, as well as submitting to Allah. And then so the evidence that in this risala here, the small paper that you have, that was given was the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. Is that what he has in there?
Yeah.
So we see here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that every ummah, or every group of people, whether it's by time or by area, every group of people was sent a messenger. And this can either be that literally they received the messenger themselves, or he was sent to an area that oversaw the other areas, and then messengers were sent out to them from him, or that they heard about it and they inherited the message that was kept in those people. So regardless, generally every group received a messenger, and the message that they were sent with was اعبدوا الله واجتنبوا الطاغوت. So these are 2 things. So we see that this can also, when we say worship Allah and avoid or stay away from the taghut, first we have to understand a few things from this verse, and we'll get into that. First of all, what is Ibâdah? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to worship Him, we have to understand, well, what does worship even mean to begin with? And second of all, what is a taghut, so we can stay away from it? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just say don't worship the taghut, He said stay away from it or avoid it. So any coming near it and anything should be avoided. So what is a taghut? This is, if we're going to understand the verse, we need to understand what this word means. So one of the best definitions for or explaining of what a taghut is was given by Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah. He said, الطاغوت كل ما تجاوز به العبد حده من معبود أو متبوع أو مطاع فطاغوت كل قوم من يتحاكمون إليه غير الله ورسوله أو يعبدونه من دون الله أو يتبعونه على غير بصيرة من الله أو يطيعونه فيما لا يعلمون أنه طاعة لله فهذه طواغيت العالم إذا تأملتها تأملت أحوال الناس معها وتأملت أحوال الناس معها رأيت أكثرهم عدلوا من عبادة الله إلى عبادة الطاغوت وعن التحاكم إلى الله وإلى الرسول إلى التحاكم إلى الطاغوت وعن طاعته ومتابعة رسوله إلى طاعة الطاغوت ومتابعته. Or Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said about the taghut, so he's defining what is meant in this verse, because if we're going to understand, what every messenger was sent with, obviously we need to understand what this word means. So he says, it is everything which a man exceeds his limits with, whether it is being worshipped, followed, or obeyed. So the taghut of every people are those who they take judgments to, instead of what Allah and His Messenger have ruled, or the ones who they worship instead of Allah, or the ones who they follow without any proof from Allah, and the ones who they obey and they don't know if they're obeying these people in the obedience of Allah or not. And then he said, so if you look at the tawaghit of the world, or the people who can take this title, he says, then and if you contemplate the conditions of the people in the world, we'll see that most of the people have turned away from worshipping Allah to worshipping the taghut. And most of the people have turned away from seeking the judgment of Allah and His Messenger to seeking the judgments from the taghut, and they've turned away from obeying or following Allah and His Messenger, or the rulings of Allah and His Messenger, to following the rulings and of the tawaghit, or the taghut. So we see from this definition that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He sent in every group of people a messenger ordering them to worship Allah and to stay away from the taghut, that He was ordering them to worship Allah and stay away from worshipping anything else, following anything else, with complete obedience, which we would give only to Allah, and then we would give to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam because he was sent as a prophet. Anything of this nature was forbidden. So this is the defining characteristics of what Tawheed is worshipping Allah and giving Allah all of the rights that only belong to Him. So anything that is specified to be only from the rights of Allah, then we give it to Him. So the rights of any act of worship, so whether it's salat, or giving zakat, or performing hajj and umrah, or fasting, or slaughtering for other than Allah, or ruling with rules that haven't, or that ruling with laws that only belong, or that this right is only belongs to Allah. Anything that's specifically designated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, or by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Sunnah, giving any of these things to other than Allah is an act of shirk. And this is why it's important to understand, what is actually worship of Allah, and what are the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And eventually, inshallah, we'll get into all those aspects. But so we understand from now, or the basis for this whole discussion is that anything that only belongs or is only the right of Allah can only be given to Him. And if it's given to anyone else, then it's considered shirk, and this person would be either not Muslim to begin with, or they would be considered that they've committed something that would take them out of Islam. So this is the first discussion, and we see in this verse as well that it's very similar to when we say La ilaha illallah. So what does this mean? When we say La ilaha illallah, we're doing two things. First of all, we're negating something, and the second thing is we're affirming something. So what does this mean? We're negating any sort of worship. So we say La ilaha. So nothing is worthy of worship except Allah. So we have to have two of these things present when we're in order for the person to be upon Tawheed. So if we just say we worship Allah, that's not sufficient, because Quraysh used to worship Allah, and many of the people before used to worship Allah, but they used to worship something with Him. So just saying that isn't enough. Just like the opposite, when we say if we say there's nothing worthy of worship and we stop there, this is also completely false as well. Because in order for someone to be Muslim, first of all, they have to say nothing is worthy of worship except Allah. So we have to have these two things. So in this verse, it's the same thing. An a'budullah wajtanib at-taghut. So an a'budullah is illallah. It's very similar to illallah, واجتنبوا الطاغوت is very similar to لا إله. So the two things need to be present. And like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَمَن يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى. Or if whoever disbelieves in the Taghut and believes in Allah, then he's held on to the firm handhold, or to the firm, grasped onto the firm handhold. So we see that these two things need to be present. And we see here also that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first mentioned disbelieving in the Taghut. So rejecting every single thing that's worshipped other than Allah, or is given any rights above what it deserves from the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And commenting on this verse, many of the scholars have said that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this first, shows that the heart has to be clear of anything else before Tawheed can actually enter it. Because if the heart won't have Tawheed and Shirk mixed within it, and the Muslim can't have Shirk and Tawheed mixed and then still be considered a Muslim. So every aspect of Shirk has to be completely gone before Tawheed can actually take place. So this is one of the explanations that the ulama give as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first mentioned disbelieving in the Taghut and then believing in Him secondly. So just about these things that the Imam mentioned in this Risala, he mentioned 2 points, and each point has 4 aspects under it. So we'll see that the 2 points that he mentioned was worshipping Allah, and the second one was not having shirk, or staying away from shirk. And then he said, so for the first one, we can divide it into 4 parts. الأمر بعبادة الله وحده لا شريك له, or commanding the worshipping of Allah alone without any partners. And the second one is والتحريض على ذلك, or encouraging people, or encouragement upon this. And the third is والموالاة فيه, or having wilaya or allegiance is based upon that. And the fourth is وتكفير من تركه, or declaring those who leave the Tawheed to be non-Muslims. So we don't accept people to worship Allah other than Allah in any aspect, and then also say, but we're also Muslims, because this is something that can't be. It negates the whole point of why the messengers were sent. Because, like we said, many of the people before would worship Allah, but they would worship other things with Allah. So we don't. This is why we say we don't accept anyone to claim Islam and accept their Islam, but while they're openly committing acts of shirk. It's not sufficient to have one. So here we see that each, and then the second one can also be divided into 4 as well. So الإنذار عن الشرك في عبادة الله, or warning against worshipping other than Allah. So this would include ourselves. So us staying away from it and warning others to stay away from it. والتغليظ في ذلك, or being harsh upon it. So we don't say, oh, this is okay, but the other one's not, or as long as he doesn't do it lots, or anything like this. Any aspect of shirk is rejected. وَالْمُعَادَةُ فِيهِ, so openly showing this. We don't just keep it in our heart. If someone tells us that they do shirk, then we tell them, we don't accept this is wrong, this is ridiculous. We don't say, oh, we're gonna be nice with them and keep it in our heart, and as long as we don't, this is something that's obligatory upon us to tell the people that we don't accept it, to tell them they need to stop it, to call to other than it, because just keeping it in your heart isn't from our religion. We're ordered to openly declare these aspects, like was in the tafsir when after the salat, when Shaykh Yahya mentioned the verse about Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam. He said about وَبَدَى بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةُ وَالْبَغْضَاءُ أَبَدًا حَتَّى تُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَحْدَهُ. Bada means it's openly being shown. وَالْعَدَاوَةُ وَالْبَغْضَاءُ. Al-adawa is something that's outward, and al-baghda is something that's inward. So we have to have both. We can't have the hatred or the dislike for things that are wrong in our heart, and then we don't openly show it. Just like if we openly show it but we don't actually have it in our heart, this is wrong as well. Both things have to be there, because this is, like we talked about before a little bit, Islam is something that's outward and inward. So both of these things need to be present. And then he says, and then he continues. He says, وتكفير من فعله. So if someone comes and they worship other than Allah, we say this person can't be Muslim, because obviously he's negated the most basic aspect of Islam. So the idea that as long as someone says they're Muslim, that no matter what they do or what they say or what they believe, then we say they're Muslim, this is something that's completely false, and inshallah we'll get into that a little bit more. So when talking about this, these two rules that have 4 subsections, I guess you could call them each, one of the ulama, Abdul-Rahman ibn Hassan, he said, وَأَدِلَّةُ هَذَا فِي الْقُرْآنِ أَكْثَرَ مِنْ أَن تُحْصَرُ. Or the evidence for this from the Quran is more than can be counted, or collected. Because how many verses in the Quran reject shirk, and how many verses in the Quran order tawheed, or order the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or order to have wilaya or love for the Muslimin, and hatred, or cutting off ties with the ones who worship other than Allah. So if you added all these verses up, there's so many that a person would have a very hard time counting them. So inshallah now we'll talk a little bit about each one of these 4 aspects of the first rule that he mentions. So he says the first one is commanding the worshipping of Allah alone without any partner. So we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَقُولُوا اشْهَدُوا بِأَنَّا مُسْلِمُونَ. Or that if we translate this verse, it can be translated as, say, O people of the book, come to a word that is just between us and you, so that we're both agreeing to it. That we worship none but Allah, and that we associate no partners with Him, and that none of us shall take others as lords beside Allah. Then if they turn away, say, bear witness that we are Muslimin. So we see from this verse that, first of all, we're ordered to call the people to this. It's not something that we just, we say, oh, I believe it, and everyone else can, I'm not going to push my beliefs on anyone else, or because if we believe this is true, and we believe Allah has the right to be worshipped, and no one has the right to be worshipped other than Him, this is something that we should be openly declaring, whether it's to Muslimin who have problems with this or who fall into acts that contradict this. We should correct them and inform them that we don't accept it, and likewise taking part in other non-Muslim acts that are worship of other than Allah, or that contain any of these aspects, they should be openly declared, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us here, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ. So the first one is the Prophet ﷺ, and we're ordered to follow him in everything that's not specific to him, and this is obviously one of the things that isn't specific to him. And we also see here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to call them to this word, so that we don't worship anything, أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, we don't worship anyone except Allah, وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ. So these 3 things. Then he said, if they turn away from this, then bear witness, or say bear witness that we are Muslimin. So if people don't accept these things, they're not Muslimin. This is clear from the ayah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't tell us to tell them, do this, and if they don't follow this, tell them, okay, well, we're Muslimin at least. This is the point of it. So if someone says, well, what is your evidence that if someone worships Allah but they also worship someone with it, what is your evidence that he's not Muslim? We tell them this verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to tell the people, do this is what we're going to agree to upon, and if you don't agree it, well we're Muslimin, and you're not Muslimin. And also another evidence for this rule is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ. Or we can translate this as, and your Lord has decreed that you worship none but Him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to worship none but Him. So we worship Him and no one else. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَ الْحُكْمُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ أَمَرَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Or it can be translated as, the judgment is for none but Allah. He has commanded you to worship none except Him. That is the straight path, or the correct, or the straight religion, but most men know not, or most people do not know. So we see here that Dîn al-Qayyim, the deen itself, is worshipping Allah and not worshipping anyone else. So this is the basis of the religion. People might say, oh, but the basis of the religion is, having, being a good person, or not eating pork or staying away from wine or not performing zina or doing all these things, yes, this is from our religion. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمِ, after He mentioned to worship Allah and not worship anyone else. So having all these other things is obviously from the religion, but if you don't have the thing that defines the religion itself, then everything else after that it doesn't benefit you in the end. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said, ألف لام را كتاب أحكمت آياته ثم فصلت من لدن حكيم عليم من لدن حكيم خبير ألا تعبدوا إلا الله إنني لكم منه نذير مبين نذير وبشير. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, ألف لام را, they translated as, this is a book, the verses of which are perfected and then explained in detail, from one who is all wise and well acquainted. Worship none except Allah. Verily, I am unto you a warner and a bringer of glad tidings from Him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here that He's obviously commanding us to do these, to worship Him and not worship anyone with Him. And He's explaining that the Prophet ﷺ is a warner and a bringer of glad tidings. So a warner against the people who worship other than Allah or don't worship Him, and giving a glad tidings to the ones who worship Allah and don't have any partners with Him. And we know that this was also the call of all of the messengers. So all of the messengers that came, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said earlier that in the verse that we mentioned, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ, or that we have sent a messenger in every people to worship Allah and avoid the taghut. But we also know that in many verses when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would talk about the da'wah of a specific messenger, that he would and his interaction with his people, that he would say, Ya qawmi abudullah ma lakum min ilahin ghayruh, or O my people, worship Allah, you have no other God or no ilah other than Him. So we see here that this was the da'wah of all of the messengers. And there's also the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said that the prophets are children from co-wives. So he described it as this, or awladu ilat. Or so what they say this means is that when the Prophet ﷺ is saying this, he's explaining that the asl of us is all the same, even though the fara' or the branches of us that we come with might be different. So we know that if a man has more than one wife and he has children from more than one wife, all of them are attributed to the same father, even though they have different mothers. So their basis or the thing that they go back to or the thing that they came from is all the same. Even though some aspects of it differ. So they have different mothers, but essentially you'd still say so-and-so son of so-and-so. It's the same man. And if he has a different mother, you still say the same thing. They all go back to the same person. So likewise, we know that the Anbiya all came with the same message. The basis of the message was the same. The ahkam might have been different. So certain things might have been obligatory on some people and not obligatory on others. Like we know, certain things were obligatory in the time of Isa alayhi salatu wassalam with regards to fasting and with regards to najasa, and then they were lifted off of us. And certain things were haram before and then made permissible for us, like the ghanaim or the spoils of war, or the Prophet ﷺ said that all of the earth was made a masjid for him or for his ummah, so following him, while before there was certain places only that the Muslimin could pray. So these types of things we see that there was a difference between the Anbiya with what they came with in these aspects, but in general they all called to worshipping Allah and staying away from the taghut. So this is something that we need to understand. And another very important point to understand from this is what many people call to today in the world, and we even see it in our city, probably on a monthly basis at least, is this whole idea of interfaith dialogues, or even worse than this is when they say it's coming together of the people from the Abrahamic faiths and things like this. What they're trying to do is say, well, we all say we came from Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. So what's the big difference? We're all saying we all accept him as a prophet, and after that, before him there was, we accept most of the Old Testament, or we accept the prophets from before Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, and we all accept that Allah sends books and that he sent books, and he sends messengers. So we might as well work together on this and leave the other things that we disagree on. But we see here that what Ibrahim ﷺ actually came with was the opposite of that. It was to worship Allah and to reject everything that is worshipped beside Allah, and to reject the people who worship things besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for people and for it's a shame for Muslimin to then use the name of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, who our deen is even titled after him, or he's the one who sammakum al-muslimin min qabl, or he's the one who called you the Muslimin from before. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَنَ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا, or follow the millah of Ibrahim as a hanif. So meaning staying away from shirk. Or he said, when he's talking about the millah of Ibrahim, he called it the millah of Ibrahim. So this is what he called our religion. So for people then to say, well, no, these people, they're Jewish, but they accept Ibrahim. Well, they also reject Isa, and they also reject Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they also reject the Quran, and they reject the Injil. Or these people are Christian, they reject Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they reject the Quran, and they worship Isa as Allah, or as Allah's son, or as Allah's whatever sect they come from. For them to state that that this is some sort of tie that we have between other people. In fact, it should be the division that we have with other people based upon Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. So this is the first point, or the first of the 4 points of the first point that is mentioned in this risala. So the second thing is, he says the second is والتحريض على ذلك, or encouraging people upon that. And we can see that there's evidence from this, from the Quran and from the Sunnah as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ مِمَّنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا. Or if we can translate this as, and who is better in religion than the one who submits his face to Allah, and he is a muhsin, and he follows the millah of Ibrahim as a hanif, and Allah did take Ibrahim as a khalil, or which is the highest level of love. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved Ibrahim with the highest level that love can be given to a human being. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا وَمَسَاكِنَ طَيِّبَةٍ فِي جَنَّاتِ عَدْنٍ وَرِضْوَانٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ ذَلِكَ هُوَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ. Or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, was translated as, Allah has promised the mu'mineen and the mu'minat, or the female and male, or the male and female believers, gardens under which rivers flow therein forever, and beautiful mansions in the gardens of Eden. But the greatest bliss is the pleasure of Allah, and that is the supreme success, or that is the great success. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being pleased with us is the greatest success. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, هَذَا بَلَاغُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلِيُنْظَرُوا بِهِ وَلِيَعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا هُوَ إِلَهُ وَاحِدٌ وَلِيَذَّكَّرَ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. Or this is a message for mankind, in order that they may be warned by it, and that they may know that He is only one ilah, and that men of understanding may take heed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or gives many examples in which encouraging each other and encouraging ourselves to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone is something from our religion. And we know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in many narrations, that he used to go to the market and he would stand up in front of all the people and say, Ya ayyuhan nas qulu la ilaha illallah tuflihu. So he would call the people to this, and he would give them an encouragement upon it. So first of all, he would tell them that this is something that they should be doing, and then he would give them encouragement upon it, tuflihu. So they would have falah if they follow this. So we know that if success comes from la ilaha illallah, and from saying la ilaha illallah and entering Islam and not worshipping anyone with Allah, and we know that the opposite of success, which is whatever you were, failure, is falling into shirk. So this also gives us the way in which we should judge what is success and what is failure. If someone has lots of money, this isn't necessarily a success if they're not giving it in the way of Allah, and they're not using it for the betterment of the Muslimin in order to assist the Muslimin. Likewise, if they're if they have property, or if they're good looking, or if they have a large family, or they have these types of things, this isn't how we judge success. Because we know that saying La ilaha illallah isn't going to bring these things. So what is something, or what does saying La ilaha illallah do that brings us success? It would save us from the hellfire and bring us into Jannah. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَمَنْ زُحْزِحَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَأُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةِ فَقَدْ فَازَ. Whoever avoids or makes it away from the fire and enters the Jannah, then he is successful. فَقَدْ فَازَ. And we know if we remember from the dars from Sheikh Harith last week, when he talked about the hadith in Sahih Muslim about the story of the boy and the king, that in the end of that story we know that all the people ended up being killed, all of them, because they said La ilaha illallah, because they weren't worshipping other than Allah. And we even know the story, like in the hadith, it mentions at the end that the woman was scared, and then her child actually spoke to her, and he was below the age of speaking. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this in the Quran as being a success. ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْكَبِيرُ. And the only place in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْكَبِيرُ. So once in the Quran he said it, and what did he say it for? He said it for a place where everybody was killed. The whole town that believed in La ilaha illallah, or the whole group in this town or in this city that believed La ilaha illallah, was killed. But despite that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it a success. He called it al-kabir. That is the greatest or the biggest success. And this is the only time he actually used this phrase in the Quran. And it was for an example where no one was left. Not one person was left. Families and children and men and women and everyone was gone. But despite that, it was a success. So this shows us what's a success, but it also shows us what an absolute failure falling into shirk is. Someone worships other than Allah, putting your face down for other than Allah, what an absolute disgusting failure that is. Using laws other than Allah, following a religion other than what Allah ordered us to do, seeking help or making dua to a person, and all these things. This is the absolute failure. It's the worst. There's nothing worse than it. So this is what we can take. And this hadith, it's narrated by Imam Ahmad, not the Ashab al-Ukhdud, the one about where the Prophet ﷺ would go to the market and say La ilaha illallah, or you people, say La ilaha illallah, you'll be successful. It's narrated by Imam Ahmad, and it's an authentic. That the Prophet ﷺ saying that is authentic. There's different stories that details of what was going on in the market at the time, or which market, different things like that. But in general, the Prophet ﷺ going there and saying this to the people, and it being a thing that he used to do, is an authentic thing. Ibn Hazm accepted it, and Ibn al-Mulaqqin, and from the Mu'asirin, or from the contemporary scholars, Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah, and Shaykh Muqbil al-Wadi'i rahimahullah, and others accepted it. So inshallah we'll stop there. Next time we'll start talking about wilaya based upon tawheed, and then we'll go into the last one, which is takfîr man tarakahu, or declaring people who leave tawheed to be non-Muslim, and not accepting the Islam of people who leave tawheed. Allah.